truthfully, the bird was bitten because he was so young when the mosquitoes came out. Ordinarily, the eagle chicks would have been at least a month old, probably close to 2 months old, and their immune system would have been more developed. He didn't have that, and that viral infection caused a big lesion, a big knot to grow almost like a tumor. That grew on the outside of his beak, but more frighteningly, it also grew on the inside. And the long and short of it was that growth plate was damaged. And so the left side of his beak doesn't grow as quickly as the right side, which means it grows crooked. So Buddy speaks to the world like this. Now, ordinarily, an animal like that we could not return to the wild, that is destined for a life in captivity, a life that could be 35 or 40 years, would have been euthanized. But we really didn't warm up to the idea of having our building burned down and our, all of our heirs for several generations castigated. Buddy came to us when he was 28 days old, and within about 5 minutes, our email and telephone system went into meltdown because there are an awful lot of people that cared an awful lot about that eagle chick that all wanted to know how he was doing, all wanted to be sure we knew that they were watching, and then half of them had seen things on the internet they were sure had to be true, and so we must have gotten, I would say, at least 100 posts of the story of the dentist in Montana that put the fake beak on the eagle when his beak had been shot off, and won't that work for Buddy? And then the guy with cancer and the eagle put his arms around, and that sort of thing, which is also hokum. And wouldn't that work for Buddy? And finally we had to negotiate and said, look,
keep reminding
we'll put daily updates on our website if you'll leave us alone so that we can actually take care of the bird. And that has turned into quite a relationship. Right now we have, we've got folks who have been to, in the last, 2.5 years, 16 eagle releases. Rose is, if Rose is not here, the alignment of the planet is just not right. But in that period of time, we've had a lot of people really develop very strong supportive relationships with the Wildlife Center, one of whom is right over here, and who is going to flash, no, she's not going to flash, the Garden of Eagles calendar. There are a lot of photographers here with us today, some who are not, who have donated images. This calendar is all about the nest at the Norfolk Botanical Gardens, and the images in there are breathtaking, world-class photography, and for those of you who contributed them, thank you very much. But take a look at that. The sale of those calendars this year is going to provide funds with which we're going to build the permanent cage for Buddy the Eagle. It's also going to support the work of the Center for Conservation Biology at College of William and Mary, and then also the work of the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries for their continued work in the conservation of eagles. So, in any case, what do we have? Eagle flying up there? There were 5 out here this morning, I'm told. So, a lot of these folks are very committed to the Wildlife Center and have found ways to get involved. Back to our eagle from the Eastern Shore. To our program already in progress. So in comes this bird, broken wing, surgery was done, he boogers that up. Next day, more surgery is done. That took. Bones start to heal, but it has to heal perfectly in order for this bird to go back to the wild. He was in captivity, and during that period of time, as is very common for birds of prey, having to sit in one spot all the time as opposed to moving around and flying and taking pressure off of its feet every single day, having to sit all the time often causes sores on the bottom of their feet, and if those sores begin to really get infected, it causes a condition called bumblefoot. And it's sort of like a planter's wart, I guess is a better characterization. Not exactly the same, but it gives you a sense. It's not just a callus. It's not just a rough spot. It actually is, it can be a deep infection. And when we find these things, one of the reasons we really examine all of our patients regularly is this is something that flows from captivity. And there's nothing we can do about holding him captive, but we can take care of it. So he was moved from the flight cage where he was really starting to fly back into the smaller cages where they could bandage his feet, treat his feet every day. which meant he lost all the strength that he had when he was out exercising, which means we had to start the rehabilitation process all over again. Bottom line is, after all of this has gone on, this bird is ready to go back to the wild. Now, the bird came from Eastern Shore, and so before the question comes up, why aren't you taking the bird back to Eastern Shore? We thought we get lots of pointed questions and with very thinly veiled accusations in there. In December, it is very possible that this bird was in the process of establishing nesting territory. Very possible. And those of you who are students of eagles know better than I, I'm sure, that they begin their nesting and pair mating or pair bonding behaviors often in December, and they will actually start building their nest in January when the snows are flying. And of course then they're laying eggs sometime, typically depending on the weather, sometime in February. It's when end of February the nests will actually have eggs in them. Well, this bird at that time may well have been oriented toward a nesting territory, but this is the time of the year, anytime from late August until about the middle of October, that the adult eagles that live in Virginia are heading south. And often, particularly right here, I'll explain why we're here in a moment, but essentially the babies of the year are raised up to a certain point, but they will continue to beg fish off their parents and mooch for a living, kind of like college students. And it is the parents who leave home, leaving the babies behind. So often we will find this time of the year, particularly into the fall, right along this stretch of the James River, is one of the highest concentrations of bald eagles in the eastern United States. That's why we bring eagles here often to release them, and especially the young eagles, because there is always a population of immature birds here, and they can find other birds from whom to steal food if they've been raised in captivity and haven't had any chance to practice fishing. And that's all part of the eagle culture. But in this case, we brought the bird here rather than driving it all the way back to Eastern Shore, because if this bird wants to go to Eastern Shore, he can get there quicker than we can. And the truth is, that bird is, once we release the bird, it'll probably hang around here for a day or so, and then almost certainly it's going to be heading south. And when it comes back, almost certainly it will go right back to Eastern Shore. And we have, over years of experience, we know these birds very, very geographically focused. We had one bird from Northern Neck who had been banded 27 years earlier. And yet the bird was found within just a few miles of the nest of which it had been hatched and banded 27 years earlier. So it was very, very geographically focused. So where we release it, pretty academic. We just wanted to spare ourselves the 8-hour round trip to Eastern Shore or whatever it would be, and we wanted to spare the bird extra time in the crate. So now where we are right now is we're going to release the bird, and I am not going to send him to the water because I don't feel like going swimming. And Murphy's Law of Eagles is if we point him to the river, we would have to send Miranda or one of our other dispensable and replaceable young people out. So, yeah, some of you all have been in on some of these crazy rescues, but we will be sending it out. Now what we'll do, and I'm going to have to open it up and move it around, I will turn the truck around so that the back of the truck faces this direction. And then the process is I will get the bird out of the cage. Miranda will come over, examine the bird. Did you all put bumpers on him this morning? Okay, so if the bumpers haven't been ripped off, which are just foam pads actually on the wrists, the wings are up in the cage, just moving around and making curves. They just like if you're in a chair and it starts to fall over, your instinctive reaction or your reflex response is to put your hands out. Same is true for birds. If they're losing their balance, they put their wings out, and in that cage there's a little metal grate, and if they're constantly banging their wrists on that, it can cause abrasions. We don't want to do that, so we put a sticky pad on there that we just call bumpers, and that has to come off. When they come out of the cage, I will then, I hope, be able to hold the bird, and I always qualify that because I did have one bite me in the face, and well, hopefully those of you who are videoing have an edit button. But that happened to be on CBS television. While I was busy holding the feet, this young bird reached up and took a chunk out of my cheek. and the blood just flew, and everybody thought it was part of the show. I assure them it was not. But I did. They put that on CBS News feed, and it was on nationwide. And so I'm getting lots of calls and heckling comments from my friends. But